Welcome to Your Family's Health, the program that focuses on healthcare issues with unique and different modalities for taking charge of your health today. Experts talk weekly with our continuing roster of guests from around the country and right here in Nassau County to keep you up to date on the latest health issues and trends. Take care of your mind, body, and soul. Spend the next half hour with the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC, and get on the journey to better health.
Hello and welcome to Your Family's Health. My name is Dr. Jeanine Cook-Garard from the nursing department here at Nassau Community College. And today we're going to talk about women's health issues, including menopause. My guest today is Dr. Mache Siebel, an international health expert and leading authority on women's wellness and menopause, and the author of a new book called Working Through Menopause. Dr. Siebel, welcome to Your Family's Health on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about you. Okay, what made you want to become an expert on women's health and issues about menopause?
Well, the issues on menopause was very simple for me. I was beginning my career. I was a leading infertility expert. I actually did some of the first in vitro fertilizations in the United States. I even helped gorillas get pregnant at the zoo.
Wow.
Yeah, that was very exciting.
That sounds exciting. I
called in a prescription for one of the gorillas, and the pharmacist says, do they have insurance? And I said, yes, HMO Zoo. But in any event, what happened was a key experience in my life was that when the 2002 Women's Health Initiative came out suggesting that estrogen could cause cancer, and it turns out that that was a mistaken information, and that has much been withdrawn since it first came out. But it caused a generation of women to throw away their hormones and really many, many doctors not to want to prescribe it. And my wife had surgery that threw her into early menopause only a few months after that study first came out. And so she was trying to get her doctors to prescribe hormones, and they were very reluctant to do so. And so I transitioned from the fertility side of things to the next half of a woman's lifespan and into the menopause arena, so I could try and figure things out so she wouldn't have to tough it out, because it was a very challenging time. And so I've been very involved in menopause since that time.
So for those that don't know, what is menopause? Define it for us.
Well, the definition medically is 1 year after a woman's last menstrual period. So if you go into menopause naturally, then you have your last period, and then a year later, so you know there's no bleeding in between, and then you have a period for then you don't have one for a full year. That's menopause, a year after your last natural menstrual period. But if you're in your reproductive years and you go through surgery, for instance, as my wife did, then the next day you're in menopause. Mm-hmm. And so it is a very rapid transition in that set of conditions.
So
that's called surgical menopause.
Yeah, surgical menopause. Is it the same as your natural menopause that you will experience?
Well, it's the same on steroids, because if you go into menopause naturally, it's like walking into the water at the beach. Very gradually, you're just slightly changing with each step. You're slightly changing with each passing month and year. But when you go into menopause surgically, you're a fully estrogenized woman one day, and the next day you're in menopause. And so that immediate kind of transition is very different because it's exacerbated, it's exaggerated, and women have much more severe symptoms. And actually, if they go into menopause before age 45, which is called early menopause, or even earlier before age 40, then that carries with it additional health risks from being deprived of estrogen that early, and carries issues related to more significant mood potential problems, the risk of even neurological conditions like Parkinson's or other things like that, more risk of heart disease, unless they get treated with estrogen from the time that happens until the time of natural menopause, which pretty much gets rid of those risks. And that's why I was so interested in my wife having hormones, and why the Women's Health Initiative unfortunately created such havoc for women.
So what is the age that most women normally experience menopause?
Well, the average age in the United States is 51. But as I mentioned, about 5 to 10% of women go into menopause before 45, and 1 in 100 goes into menopause before age 40. So there are a lot of women who go into menopause at a very early time.
Does that depend upon your mother and how she experienced menopause? Does it have any familial context?
It does. As a matter of fact, if you want to know when you're most likely to go into menopause, just ask your mom when she went into menopause. And while it doesn't come with a guarantee that that's going to be the same, it's highly likely that when your mother did, you would follow it along those same timelines.
So you mentioned something about some risk factors for those women experiencing early menopause. How about women who experience menopause very late in life?
Not really. There's no particularly additional risk. They have the risk of getting pregnant for a longer period of time. And every once in a while, you'll have an oops baby, so to speak. Oops, didn't plan that one. But that can happen. And but there's no real consequence of that.
So are any menopause symptoms that a woman can expect to
Well,
experience?
menopause, like every other transition in life, is a specific or an individual type of experience. So every woman's experience is going to be different. The most common symptoms, of course, people know about hot flashes. They know about mood swings. Those things, foggy brain, those kinds of things are quite common. Sensitive bladder, you have to go to the bathroom more often, or maybe you have to go urgently to the bathroom. Those are very, very common symptoms. Also, heart palpitations are very common, where it feels like your chest is fluttering. These are very common. I call those the noisy symptoms because you know they're happening and you're very aware of them. But there are what I call silent symptoms as well, because during that window of time, if you're not addressing it, then you're more at risk for loss of calcium from the bones and more at risk of osteoporosis. And that doesn't come with any symptoms until you break a bone, unless you get a bone density and you know that your bones are thinning, or heart disease, which kills 10 times more women than breast cancer, which is 10 times more scary than heart disease for most women. But those are silent. You don't know those are happening. But there's a lot of symptoms. Not everybody gets them all. That's a good thing.
So are these symptoms directly related to estrogen changes as it relates to menopause?
Primarily. I mean, there is a difference between menopause and aging. A lot of people say, when you're older, you just expect those things. I say, no, you don't have to expect anything in particular, because the better care you take of yourself, the better habits that you develop for your health, the more those are going to sustain you for a symptom-free or symptom-minimal experience as you get older. But most of the symptoms due to menopause are due to the fact that the body is no longer exposed to estrogen unless you take it externally as a pill or patch or something. That's a separate set of circumstances from aging. They're two parallel paths next to each other.
Sounds like fun.
The good thing about it is that, number one, everyone's going to go through it that lives long enough. Every woman will. And while the symptoms are most intense around the time of menopause and in the years leading up to it, after you get through that window of time, for most women, things actually get terrifically better. And so it's a window of time to understand, to get educated on, and to take meaningful actions so that you can have the best transition possible. And then when you come out the other side, you can say, what was that all about? Mm-hmm. But you'll feel terrific.
So your new book talks about how menopause needs to become a work-related issue. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes. A lot of people don't think of women in the workplace that are in menopause as a very big part of the working women. You tend to think maybe women in the workplace are younger women. But it turns out that half of the workforce is female, and half of the females are either in perimenopause, the years leading up to menopause, or in menopause. So a quarter, 45 to 50% of the workforce are women in that demographic. But it turns out that almost no companies in the United States take any special consideration of women in that demographic. And that's to their great disadvantage, both the women and the businesses. And the reason is because as a result of having no policies in place. Many times, if there's nothing said about it, there's no policies on it, there's no discussion of it, people think it's very taboo and you're not supposed to even talk about it. So it's something that no one mentions. People worry about age discrimination and that if people view them as older, maybe they won't be taken as seriously or they won't be hired. And it's not been that many years that we've had pregnancy as something that was viewed as a workplace issue that had to be addressed. Almost every company has pregnancy policies, at least the vast majority do. It's not unusual to have time off when you have a baby. It's not unusual to be able to go to the doctor for a prenatal visit. But when you get past that demographic, women's health care stops. And that's something that's unfortunate because, as I said, if you live long enough, every woman will have menopause. It's just a natural phenomenon. Just like every woman went through puberty, or everyone goes through puberty, but every woman went through puberty, and at the other end of her reproductive cycle, she's going to go through perimenopause and menopause. But less than 1% of companies are addressing it.
You're listening to Your Family's Health on the voice of NASA Community College 90.3 WHPC. My name is Dr. Jeanine Cook-Garard, and today we're learning about women's health issues, including menopause. My guest today is Dr. Mache Siebel, an international health expert and leading authority on women's wellness and menopause, and the author of a new book called Working Through Menopause. So how would addressing women's workplace health lead to greater employee retention and improve a company's bottom line?
Well, in many ways. First of all, you wouldn't be in a circumstance that the women felt they couldn't talk about it, they couldn't address it, they couldn't have their needs met. They would be able to have time off if they need medical visits. They might be able to go to more flexible hours. Now, with COVID and all the things that are happening, many people are working remotely. And so we're seeing some of that happen sort of organically. How long that's going to happen, we don't know. But having the flexibility to address their symptoms and to have more comfort in the workplace and to be able to talk about these things and acknowledge it so they don't have to hide and worry about feeling shame because they have a hot flash in the middle of a meeting, or that they can't get to the bathroom quick enough because there's not enough women's bathrooms or none close enough to them. Having a place where they could adjust the temperature in the work setting, where they could feel like if they're really hot, they could cool down. They certainly can dress in layers, but you can only strip down so far. And so you want to have some kind of a fan or some ability to adjust your room temperature. Just very simple things could go a very long way. And then having a policy that acknowledges it and addresses it and can deal with the issues that spontaneously come up in every woman's life at one time or another. And this isn't just the women sitting at a desk doing, the secretarial work is all the way up to the CEOs and all the way down to the human resources and the people in the mailroom. It's a universal circumstance.
So what can we do to reduce those hot flashes? I know you talked about them. What do we do for that?
Oh, well, the first thing that people should do is realize that there are many treatments. Of course, people could take, they're at many levels, but just reducing stress can help hot flashes. Sometimes just by changing nutritional content to healthier organic foods and eating a good diet that doesn't have a lot of processed foods and sugars can help. Sometimes exercise on a regular basis can help reduce hot flashes. These are the basic, sleeping more can help reduce hot flashes. But if that doesn't work, there are some over-the-counter remedies that help some women. Everything works for some people some of the time. Nothing works for everyone all of the time. Then there are non-hormonal medications that are available if people want to try things that are not hormones. And if they're open and appropriate for hormone therapy, well, hormone therapy is very effective and is FDA approved for treating hot flashes, and that will resolve them overwhelmingly in a short period of time.
So you mentioned hormone therapy. Does that include estrogen therapy? And if so, I've heard a lot about the link of estrogen therapy to cancers. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that's an unfortunate result of a very bad study design. When the Women's Health Initiative came out, it was a well-woman study. It was supposed to have women in it that were ages 50s, 60s, and 70s, so from 50 to 79. And it was supposed to prove by comparing hormones to non-hormones whether estrogen was effective and safe for women to take. Unfortunately, when they designed the study, although there was supposed to be an equal number of women in their 50s, 60s, and 70s in both the hormone group and the placebo group, that didn't happen. 75% of the women who got the hormones were in their 60s and 70s, and 75% of the women who got the placebo or the sugar pill were in their 50s. So the study ended up comparing 60 and 70-year-olds to 50-year-olds. The second thing that went wrong is that it was supposed to be a well woman study. Now, the average person would assume that a well woman was one that was well. But it turned out that there were many of the women who got the hormones who were significantly overweight, who had diabetes, who had high blood pressure, and those are all things that can contribute to heart disease and breast cancer. And so, as a result, they were comparing women with medical conditions who were 60 and 70s to healthy women in their 50s, and the women who were a little bit older had more problems. They had more cancer, they had more heart disease. It turns out over a decade later, when they used the same study, the same patients, the exact same information, but looked at it by age, and they compared the 50-year-olds to the 50-year-olds, the problems basically went away. And so if women start estrogen, and that's the basis of one of my books, the Estrogen Window, if women begin hormones close to the time of menopause beginning, the risks are virtually gone and the benefits are maximized. And that is the big difference between estrogen being safe and effective for most women and estrogen carrying with it some risks.
So when you talk about estrogen, I guess what you're saying is that you do encourage estrogen in your menopausal women. And so if you do, what preparation of estrogen? Is it, what kind of preparation? Is it something that's given vaginally? Is it something that's given orally? How are you giving estrogen?
Well, we'll start at the bottom and work our way up. You talked about vaginal, so we'll start there. Vaginal estrogen is required by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, to carry a black box warning that says it can cause cancer, it can cause heart disease, it can do all kinds of things. Yet, there are no data to support that vaginal estrogen can increase the risk or recurrence, the risk of death or recurrence of breast cancer, even in estrogen receptor positive breast cancers. So any woman who has painful sex, who is having vaginal dryness, who's having a real issue, should be able to talk with her healthcare provider about taking estrogen. She can try over-the-counter products. She can try non-estrogens first, but the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists has issued an opinion piece that's very clear. Through all the data that's available, there is no evidence that vaginal estrogen increases the risk of breast cancer or the recurrence of it or any increased risk of death. There's just no data to that. So women should not suffer with that condition. As far as the formulations and which ones, and I'm not saying every woman should be on hormones. You should take what you're comfortable with and make sure that you don't have a reason not to take it. But for most women, it will be safe and effective. So what should you take? Well, there's basically, there's oral ones, there's skin ones, and there's the vaginal ones. The oral ones have the disadvantage of having to be digested, and that increases slightly, particularly at higher dosages, slightly the risk of a blood clot. So if you want to have the lower risk, taking them through the skin is better. Patches, there are patches, gels, sprays, there are a whole host of things. Then people get into the whole discussion of bioidentical hormones versus the ones that come bioidentical, meaning from a compounding pharmacy, rather than one from a national chain drugstore. And there has been the perception that if it comes from the compounding pharmacy, It's both safe and natural. Both of those are needing discussion. As far as natural, yes, the estrogen is derived from plants, but it cannot be processed in the body to a hormone that your body can use. And because of that, the only way you can get estrogen from a plant that grows on the ground is by sending it to a chemical plant to be transformed into a medication. So there is no natural, even though they may be bioidentical, the same physical shape, they are not natural. They're chemically produced. The second is, are they safer? There is no study to say they're safer, none in the literature. However, in one very distressing study that was published in 2013 in More magazine, they sent a prescription, they sent one prescription to 12 compounding pharmacies. The compounding pharmacies filled the prescriptions and mailed them to a chemical analysis lab. The chemical analysis lab analyzed the data and sent it back to More magazine. And none of the hormones that were manufactured would have passed FDA regulations. They were so far away. And it turned out that the values of estrogen in the 12 compounded pharmacy prescriptions were anywhere from 100% of what was wanted, which is correct, all the way up to 259% more estrogen. And the amount of progesterone was, on average, 80% of what was wanted. So they had an overabundance of estrogen and an required amount of progesterone. And that imbalance was so great that there have been some cases of uterine cancer, endometrial cancer, from too much hormones, too much estrogen, and not enough progesterone for its protective benefits in women who have a uterus. That's only happened from compounding pharmacies. That has not happened from any national chain drugstore. So you have to get the information straight and be clear so that you're not confused by it.
You're listening to Your Family's Health on the voice of Nassau Community College 90.3 WHPC. My name is Dr. Jeanine Cook-Garard, and today we're learning about women's health issues, including menopause. My guest today is Dr. Mache Siebel, an international health expert and leading authority on women's wellness and menopause, and the author of a new book called Working Through Menopause. So, doctor, tell me, does menopause affect a woman's sex drive?
It certainly can. For some women, as they particularly get through that transitional window, sexuality and desire increases. But the lowest point in a woman's life in terms of interest in sex typically happens around menopause. Of course, if you're having hot flashes, if you're not sleeping well and you're exhausted, if you're feeling a little foggy, maybe you've gained a little weight, maybe your skin is changing, maybe you're not feeling so sexy. And as a result of that, things do change. If you have dryness, vaginal dryness, which causes it to be painful. So that doesn't mean you can't have a very good and active sex life. It means that you have to talk with your healthcare provider to make sure that you do. It turns out that when it comes to painful sex and issues related to sexuality and menopause, only about 7%, that's 0.7% of women talk about it and get treated. That's for two reasons. The women don't tell and the doctors don't ask. And so it's very important, if this is an area of concern for you, that you just talk with your healthcare provider. And if you find that that person is either uncomfortable or doesn't have time or it's not their area of expertise, get a referral, because people are out there who can help you.
So I saw in a menopause quiz in your website. What is that all about, that quiz?
I have a free quiz that's at menopausequiz.com. And the whole point of it is just to let people see where their symptoms compare with those of other women. And then based on the score, they get some information to try and help them. That's a simple thing. Again, menopausequiz.com.
You wrote another book called Estrogen Fix. Can you tell us about that book and why you decided to write that one?
Yes, the Estrogen Fix was an update of the Estrogen Window, and it basically is the soft cover of the hardback with some updated information in it. And the latest book, Working Through Menopause, its impact on women, businesses, and the bottom line, it goes into the effect of menopause. I mean, you wouldn't think that menopause hot flashes we talked about earlier is costing businesses in this country $14 billion. $14 billion just for hot flashes. And that doesn't include all of the other symptoms. I mean, businesses worldwide lose $810 billion from menopause as a symptom due to the cost of replacing women in the workplace, the cost that because they drop out, and other things that go along with it.
So where can we find more information about you and your books?
Oh, I have a website called drmach.com, drmach.com. And I have a lot of information. There's a lot of free information. And if you're interested to be in touch for coaching or other things like that, people can contact me, drmach.com. And I want to tell you also that I have a magazine that's very popular. It's a digital magazine. It's the #1 magazine for women in midlife. It's called The Hot Years, and it's available at hotyearsmag.com, hotyearsmag.com. It's a very good magazine for women who try to discover more about their life and midlife and figure out answers to questions that they typically have.
I learned a lot today. If you had to leave us with one word or two words to wrap this all up, what would they be?
Don't suffer silently. If you have a problem, talk with your healthcare provider. Almost every ailment you have has a treatment that will help you. That would be my advice to women everywhere.
Thank you. It was so very impactful. Thank you for being here, Dr. Mache Siebel, an international health expert and leading authority on women's wellness and menopause, and the author of a new book called Working Through Menopause. We hope you stay safe and continue to stay healthy, and thank you for being our guest today.
Well, it was a pleasure, a delightful host, and I appreciate you having me on.
This is Dr. Jeanine Cook-Garard from the nursing department here at Nassau Community College, and we want to thank you for listening to this week's edition of Your Family's Health.
We'd like to get your feedback on your family's health. Send your comments by emailing them to whpc@ncc.edu. Podcasts of today's show are available on iTunes, Android Podcasts, and Spreaker. This program was produced at the studios of Nassau Community College in cooperation with the nursing department. Join us next week for another edition of Your Family's Health on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.